Hello, and welcome to this live stream titled Fueling Innovation, Leading Pharmaceuticals, Accelerating U.S. Research. I'm the moderator, 𝗟𝗲𝗱𝗶𝗴𝗴, the Assistant Vice Chancellor and Managing Director for the Office of Technology Management at Washington University in St. Louis, and also co-founder of the nonprofit Equalize Startups. I'm so happy to be here. Today, we are diving into how leading pharmaceutical companies are helping sustain and supercharge university-led innovation in the U.S. at a time of tightening federal R&D budgets. In the comments on LinkedIn, Julie Savarino posted the PowerPoint deck we are using, so you can download it from there. It's exciting that we have so many of you joining us for this live stream. Since we are live, if you have any questions, please type your question in the comment box. The comment box is on the right-hand side of your screen if you are on a laptop device or a desktop, and at the bottom of your screen if you're on a mobile device. We are thrilled to have three distinguished experts speaking to us today. Gsline Anderson is the U.S. Director and Strategic Research Relationships from Boehringer Ingelheim. 𝗟𝗲𝗱𝗶𝗴𝗶 is the Senior Director and Global Search and Evaluation at Novo Nordisk US R&D, and John Wilson. He is the Director for Academic Liaison at GSK. Thank you all for being here. So let's start with brief introductions. Could each of you just share a little bit about your role and your company's approach to partnering with academia? So we'll start with you, Gsline.
Sure. Welcome, everybody. I guess a little bit of background on myself is I spent over 2 decades in some form of business development, licensing, commercializing new technologies, and alliance management at different universities, large hospitals, and for the last 8.5 years, crossed over into industry, which is now where I serve as the strategic research relationship head for Boehringer Ingelheim here in the U.S. I also sit on the board for 𝗟𝗲𝗻, and this is an association that helps bring early stage technologies to life, to the public. All of us on this panel today are part of 𝗟𝗲𝗻. We met at 𝗟𝗲𝗻 and started talking about this actual presentation today in the last meeting in February. So I'll pass it on to my next colleague.
Wonderful. Tari?
Hi, everyone. 𝗟𝗲𝗱𝗶𝗴𝗶, and I am the head of global search for Novo Nordisk, the pharmaceutical company. I actually came from an academic technology transfer licensing background before I moved over to pharma. I still am actually required to look at academia very closely, and that's one of the reasons why I'm on this panel today. And what we look for is novel knowledge, such as biological pathways and targets. We do monitor the literature, quite extensively throughout the organization, and my job is to help facilitate those relationships, and we'll talk more about that as we go on today. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tari. John, can you round us out?
Absolutely. John Wilson, GlaxoSmithKline, Director of Academic Liaison. Been at GSK for about 25 years. I'm a preclinical development scientist. About 11 years ago, I made the switch into BD, and where I sit now, working on negotiation, execution, and facilitation of all of our academic agreements. Also do a lot with the PhD programs and studentships within the United States, as we do have some colleagues in the UK that do a lot of the BPSRC, EPSRC studentships and fellowships. Primary responsibility is filling the gap. We know where cutting edge science comes from. It comes from the academic centers, and our goal is to partner and collaborate with them, not treat them as service providers, actually collaborate to develop scientific knowledge as well as development. Sometimes that includes GSK molecules. Sometimes that includes just really good science to try to further that educational piece. So look forward to talking. I was part of 𝗟𝗲𝗻. I'm also board chair for UIDP, another organization that plays in this space very well in regards to university and academic collaborations with industry partners.
Wonderful. Thanks to all of you for making the time to do this live stream today. So we'll go to the next slide, and here are the 3 questions I will pose to our speakers. First, what are the types of investments our panelists or companies are making? Second, what are the areas of R&D and innovation of most interest to these specific companies that we're hearing from? And finally, how do you engage in proposing a partnership or presenting a licensing opportunity? So as we proceed, if you have a question for any of the speakers or for all of them, please type your question into the comment box and we will respond. Now, let's talk specifics. Okay, first question, what types of investments are your companies making in university-led innovation? And can you maybe share some recent examples of partnerships or programs that have made a real impact? Галин, we'll start with you.
All right. So first off, I would just like to say, I think that all three of our companies here today will agree that we follow the science wherever that's going to be. We're not institution specific. And for Boehringer, I can speak that we also are not open-ended arrangements with the way our strategy is, the way we think about collaborations and partnerships. The best point of entries are usually with our scientists in the individual therapeutic areas, because these scientists are going to be the ones that are going to manage those programs and manage those research projects and partnerships. And, you know, usually Boehringer has the strategy, if we don't know you already, we start with something small. And then if it goes well, then it just keeps expanding, because now we know what your competencies are, you know how we work, and it leads to other opportunities. I think an example, you want me to share an example, Nicole, of something that's unique? So I was thinking about that ahead of time, because all of us can, you know, we have a gazillion things that we're working on, small projects, large projects, big alliance programs, multiple institutions or single institutions. But one that stands out in my head is something that kind of crossed over to multiple levels, not just in research or our venture arm or our business development and licensing. And this was a company that was spun out of the University of Texas in Arlington in the Dallas area, and it's called 𝗟𝗻𝗱𝗶𝗴. In 2016, our venture arm of Boehringer invested in them. And then about a year later, they won an innovation prize, which is part of our grassroots programs where small companies can get incubator space, et cetera. And then from there, we started collaborating with them a little more intensely. It ended up that Boehringer built a facility. So we even have now space, lab space in the Arlington area to be close to that university and the PI. He stayed at the university the entire time. And we have some unique postdoc programs between 𝗟𝗻𝗱𝗶𝗴, the company, and Boehringer, and also the university. And then in 2021, we acquired 𝗟𝗻𝗱𝗶𝗴, and they continue to do interesting work. And this is in the immuno-oncology space. So I think that that was just a great example of something that came out of a university, and we thought it was so important into our research programs that we even invested not only in the startup company itself, but built a small lab facility for ourselves to be even closer. Since our headquarters are in Connecticut, we wanted to be closer.
That's fantastic. And that's a great example. So I appreciate that you shared that for us. Tari, next.
Yeah, absolutely. And really building on what both Галин and John have shared, right, is that it's always science first, and really starting with the interest from an internal scientist is often the easiest way, because like as I mentioned before, we do monitor literature. We have many people in our company who go out to different scientific conferences, and that is really where the beginnings of a conversation towards a collaboration are more likely going to come to the fruition of an actual partnership in that regard. You know, we look into academia because we do consider that academic research is still where you get the cutting edge of knowledge, right? New biologies, new pathways, new targets as they pertain to our strategic interest. And that's another topic that I know we're going to talk is this sort of like, what do our respective companies focus on as a way to share that information with our audience? So collaborations are really probably the most common format, because it gets to Galen's point, this is how we get to know each other. That being said, you know, as part of an example, we can do larger things, and we pride ourselves at Novo Nordisk that we are flexible. We do think long term. like you, Gsell, we start small to build the relationship and the respect and the trust to then potentially broaden out where necessary. So some examples in recent years has been the larger consortium agreement that we have, the Empire Discovery Institute, which is a collection of academic institutions in Northern New York, not necessarily New York City, but my team, we are scattered through our different regions in the world, and we all cultivate relationships with the academic institutions in our respective regions. And we can definitely dive deeper into that as we go today.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. John, can you share with you about your company, please?
Sure. I echo Gsell and Tari's responses. I mean, we go from very small. We do material transfers for developing world, malaria, tuberculosis. We're very well known for, developing world drugs, and our Trace Conto Center in regards to that type of work. However, one of the biggest things, strategic research agreements, any kind of our RCAs, that's probably our largest piece of investment in regards to that. However, as everyone knows on this call, regardless of your position, money is getting tighter and tighter. We are starting to align with much more strategy in regards to what are you doing that you have interest in what we are doing, and how can we help develop that scientific model? Everything that we can present, I'm not going to speak for Tari and Gsell, but I would assume has to be in the public specter in regards for me to be able to speak of it. So I can give examples from King's College, Oxford, Cambridge, CREM, Boston University, the Center for Regenerative and Experimental Medicine. Those are larger scale. When I say larger scale, I'm talking $10 to $40 million investments. That type of work is not where we start out. That type of work is from internal discussions, internal experience. Someone says, hey, listen, we're developing organoids or iPSCs. You have a research center, you have an entire division that wants to work on that. We will partner. It might be a material transfer to start out. How do we work together? Can we work together? Can we develop an organoid model that we're happy with? That type of work is obviously where we would love to sit, because we can go back and forth, we can collaborate, we can partner, we can pivot. Just because we start off in one area doesn't mean that we can step back. For people that work in the clinical space, GSK has peer centers that we do our clinical trials. We would love to have preclinical work happening there, because we can have the ability to pivot that work as we're going through phase one. How can we work with the scientists? One of the biggest pieces I have for the GSK scientists that I speak with is don't ever treat an academic center as a fee-for-service project. We want to work with them. We want to collaborate. Do not treat them as a vendor. They are scientists that want to work and collaborate with us. And the biggest compliment I have ever heard is someone that has worked with us and said, hey, I'd really like to work with you again because you were great partners. I understand we all have bosses. Obviously, our nature of our business is we have a board that we answer to. But for developmental science, if you're working in the academic space, one of the biggest return on investments we see is the development of science and publication. If we get IP, if we get art, great. But if we can actually make a move that actually will help a patient, that's where we see the real win, and where our company really wants to dedicate themselves to invest. So just because we say we're going to do an intake, it doesn't mean that everything else is off the table. But we get the GSK scientists involved.
Your audio is cutting in and out for us. I don't know if it's your connection. Maybe could you take a look at that? I apologize. Well, while you're looking at that, because I'd love to hear what you did say, we'll just pivot to a question by Michael Garanon, who posted on LinkedIn. So thank you, Michael, for doing that. Can we find the case study online with Avexa and Behringer? Gsell, that would be helpful for their researchers. Is that possible?
So there is lots of press release about it, actually, of the different stages of what we were doing. The company is actually called Avexa with a B. Maybe it didn't come through the way I was saying it, but yes, they can find it. And while John was talking, I just wanted to point out something that maybe didn't come through in his crazy voice stuff, is that he mentioned that everything that we do is strategic to what our research strategies are. We love interesting science sometimes, but if it's not aligned with what we're actually doing internally, then it's not something that we're going to bring in-house. So I thought that was an important point that he was trying to make when he was talking. And I'm sure it's the same for Tari as well, that it's important for the university partners to understand that it really needs to align with what our internal programs are, because we are looking for those puzzle pieces that need to fit into our overall table puzzle.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Tari, I'll just follow up with the same question. You had mentioned Empire collaboration. Is that online as well?
Yeah, there's press releases out there. Again, this is one of the reasons why we can speak to it, because as a publicly held company, we can, we have confidential obligations. But there are press releases that were issued by Empire Discovery Institute that will describe it in detail. So not hard to find.
Wonderful, thank you. And John, I see that you're in our audio only, which is great. We're glad to have you. Do you want to try again and maybe share what you'd like to get across with the viewers? Okay. It is still coming through a little bit garbled on our end. All right.
Going from my computer to my phone. I'm trying to figure it out. I apologize. I have no idea why it's happening.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I'm not super technically savvy, but I will give you a few minutes to see if you can maybe have some conversations on the side, and maybe we'll move to the next slide. So thank you all for those responses. I think it's really helpful to keep some of these key pieces in mind about how you make connections through internal scientists, how you're monitoring the literature, and that really there has to be alignment with your strategy, and it has to make sense for the company. So with that in mind, maybe you could talk a little bit about the areas of R&D and innovation that your company is most interested in supporting and investing in right now. Tari, would you mind going first, and we'll jump to slide 9?
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. And again, this is really, really important for our audience to understand, is that, and Galen and I have many conversations about this, is that, and we will talk a lot about how to approach pharma, but a slide like this is usually available. I will tell you that this is actually probably on our partnering website, but if you encounter us at conferences, we walk around with this on our phones, our laptops, etc., and we're always happy to speak to this. So at Novo Nordisk, our history starts with diabetes, and it actually started with an academic licensing deal with the University of Toronto for the rights to be able to commercialize the use of insulin to treat diabetes in Scandinavia. And from there, that's we started over 100 years ago. So partnering, as we like to say, is in our DNA, and this is why we have a fondness and respect for academia. From diabetes, we have branched out into obesity. And then from there, we have also branched out into other cardiometabolic conditions that are tied to the diabetic and obese condition, like cardiovascular disease. As we were working on producing insulin at scale, we also built a business around recombinant human growth hormone, as well as recombinant clotting factors. And that led to our rare disease business, which is still very active today. So those are our key therapeutic areas. We do have a new CEO that was announced just yesterday. However, we will most likely not deviate from these. We have become modality agnostic. We started out in proteins and peptides. We are now very open to other modalities like small molecules, siRNAs. We acquired Dicerna a few years ago. That demonstrates that. And we're always looking at novel modalities. There was a biotech deal that I drove a couple years ago that brought in a novel modality called molecular glue degraders. And then we also do branch out into looking at data-driven solutions, and we have different units within the company that will work on devices. But the general mandate for my group is to bring in enabling technologies as well as assets into our pipeline. And that is also important to understand. What is the driver behind a pharmaceutical company reaching out to external parties? It is really to grow our business and make it sustainable and strong.
Fantastic, thank you. John, I did see you pop in. So if you're here, maybe we'll go back to slide 8 and see if your audio is good now.
Is it any better? I apologize.
Yes, we can hear you. It's wonderful. And if you want to address anything from
not seeing me is not going to hurt anyone's feelings. I promise you. So that's fine.
Well, we know you're there. And if you want to go back to the previous question and add anything, feel free to do that.
No, I'm fine. I don't know what everyone heard, but please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. But ultimately, I mimicked everything that Tari and Galen said, that we align. And don't be discouraged by working with GSK. If we start with a material transfer agreement, we would love to do larger collaborations. I think that's where some of the really exciting science is. But at the same time, we really want to work with the partners, and scientific development and scientific edification is where we really want to partner. If it goes into something great, awesome. However, in the academic space, we really do look at scientific development, and the ROI for scientists is to be able to get publications. We would love IP to develop. However, at the same time, we all know that the elephant in the room every time we negotiate is the IP piece. So I'm not upset when IP is not created and or dragged in from both sides. However, at the same time, we understand that's where really some of the exciting science is, to work with the best cutting edge, might be under patent prosecution, might be a GSK asset. But ultimately, if you have a scientist at GSK you want to work with, please let them know to get in touch with me. Get in touch with me directly through LinkedIn, and we will make it happen. In regards to GSK's interest, this is a snapshot. Do not think this is going to be there forever. I know this will live on the internet forever. However, we move in and out. GSK is very disease agnostic in all of these therapeutic areas. If we see alignment, great. It does not matter where you sit. These are our heavy hitters that if you reach out to me, I probably can give you within 10 minutes, give you the right contact to reach out to. It doesn't mean we're going to have a research collaboration. Doesn't mean the exact science will be there. However, it does mean I know who to put you in contact with, and I hope they provide you feedback on these areas. So these are the type of things that GSK right now considers their high value targets. This is what we want to really invest in. This is what we are developing our science and development, research and development wise within GSK. And we're looking for partners to make everything, from delivery, from efficacy, from target identification, pathway identification. These are the areas that really, I know that will get some traction and get you feedback. If I make an introduction, there's slight interest. It might be, in the AI/ML space, it might be a data transfer agreement to share some data, to let you play with algorithm science, to be able to look at this. If it's developmental science on delivery of oligonucleotide, iPSC, organoids, et cetera. So these are just sort of a snapshot of where we're looking. My goal is to always provide feedback. Doesn't mean I always can. I try to know the scientists as best as I can and what our interests are. However, that is a very fluid environment for us. We have a board. They like to say focus like everyone does, but at the same time, they do pivot based on the nature of the research, what they're finding, where the money sits, what our interests are. So don't take this as a set in stone target, but if you do have areas that you think you'd have good synergy, and when I say that, the only reason is I can get the most traction when you have a scientist that is eager to work with us, that want to work with us, but also that their research area is very overlapping within the GSK for, we can develop drugs, we can look at the scientists, we have the really cool toys. However, the cutting edge science is coming out of the universities.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. We really appreciate it. Galen, do you want to go to the next slide and we can hear from you?
Sure. So for those of people that are not as familiar with Boehringer Ingelheim, I'll just mention that the company is over 140 years old, and it's the world's largest independent pharma company, which allows us some flexibility in long range looking at things, including the way that we collaborate and work with universities. What you're seeing on the screen right now just shows the 6 main kind of therapeutic areas that we focus on. I think we probably are most known for respiratory diseases early on for Boehringer's history, but most recently, we're probably most known in the cardiorenal metabolic space because of all the Jardiance singing commercials that you see all the time. But we focus on areas that have common pathological mechanisms such as fibrosis and immune modulation, and these areas that contribute to multiple diseases. So I won't go into great detail on each one of these areas, but I will say that if you went to boehringeringelheim.com and you went to our partnering section, there's something for animal health and there is for human health. If you went to human health, you will see the tiles of each of these areas, and it'll show you what our research interests are, what our partnering interests are, and where we at in each one. And when people then come to me, especially universities, and they want to talk about a research potential collaboration or partnership or something for our business development and licensing group, if I can kind of tell if they haven't done their homework a little bit, a good example would be in mental health. If you went there, you would see what we're interested in, and Alzheimer's is not on that list, but schizophrenia and other things are there. So I really implore universities to do your homework and see where specific areas that we play in when you're going to share information, because you're more likely to get more engagement, more interesting discussions, more feedback on what you're sharing. And I know Tari and I both have said this before. When we were back at universities working on that side of the table, it's discouraging when you're sending out information or emails and you're not hearing anything back. But I think early in my career, I did that. Later in the career, you learn that the more strategic and homework that you can do to find the right partner, it's kind of the rifle approach instead of the shotgun approach where you're sending out lots of stuff. Really pay attention to why that partner would be good for your programs and how you'll add value or align with what they're trying to do. Okay, you can go to the next slide. And I also wanted to show this. This shows a little bit all the different ways that you can collaborate with Boehringer Ingelheim. And one of my favorite things on this list is openme.com. So if you just go to OPN and then nme.com, you'll see a unique open science approach that we have too, where we share free molecules around the world. We also do collaborations for research through that portal. That's in addition to our regular research collaborations. We have interesting postdoc programs through there. So that's something that you can share with your faculty if they want access to interesting molecules that we're no longer using, and we share them with the world to use. But it's also a portal where you can suggest things that may not have anything to do with those molecules for interesting ideas that we can collaborate on. But the rest of that just shows our venture fund, our business development licensing, our grassroots programs, things that I talked about earlier of all the ways that you can engage with Boehringer Ingelheim.
This is great. Thank you to all three of you for sharing all of that information. I think one of the questions we got in the chat, which we all knew was coming and it took only 18 minutes to get there, is a question around sort of the current environment for funding at academic research centers. So the question is, with significant cuts in research budgets proposed for the NIH and NSF, are your companies looking at changing your investment strategies? For example, even more investment in fundamental or early stage or early TRL type academic research?
So I don't know who wants to go first, but I can start. I will say that we're not having a lot of conversations that changes from what we're doing already. And you know, we understand what's happening in the ecosystem. It stresses us out because if any part of the ecosystem is hurting or having stress, then it's going to flow to us as well. But what we do is we still just try to follow the science. And when I am working with the university, though, I really do try to pay attention to helping them, whether if it's, you know, a tech transfer office and we're sharing material and it could be just a material transfer agreement, or it could be a tangible property license and then it's a license into their office. But when it comes to collaboration agreements and research that we're doing, it's really just the same course. We're just following the science. And if I can put in more programs, interesting postdoc programs, or PhD type of opportunities, then I do look for those things instead of maybe hiring new FTEs or putting in other programs where we're going to CROs. If it's something that can go to a university, we are acutely aware that that's helpful in our ecosystem right now.
Wonderful. Thanks, Gayleen. Tari or John, do you want to add anything to that question there?
Yeah, I mean, like Gayleen, it's not so much that we are actively reacting. I know it sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, right? Again, you know, we are keenly aware of what is happening in the US, but at our core, we are a global company, right? And so we look at science across, you know, and around the world. And there is good science to be found everywhere: Europe, Asia, Australia, as well as the US. Do I empathize with the challenges? Absolutely. What we are finding is that we now are getting more inflow of potential proposals for how we might work together scientifically. And again, coming to us, like I said, and we will talk a little bit more about how to approach, but if there is a proposal that aligns with our strategy, we will look at it. But again, here, I can only underline how important it is to build these relationships with people like us representing our companies and make us aware of, who amongst your, your researcher cohorts are in our respective spaces and bring them to our attention, right? Because we follow science, because we follow the data, that's where we will go. But my responsibility first and foremost is to my company and my company's business. And we will look across all stages. We will look across academia, biotech, as well as our peers for opportunities. So there's a lot that we look at. So if you can figure out a way to cut through the noise efficiently and graciously, you'll get our attention.
So Tari, to that point, what you just said, do you notice that the universities coming to you now are being more strategic and spending more time doing their homework ahead of time and coming with specific ideas, just really putting their thinking business development hats on more than they ever did before? Because I would say that I'm noticing that, and it's very much appreciated.
Yes. Yeah. And I have gone on the record in other panels where I've simply said, very honestly, you are competing for attention with biotechs, with startups. And actually, one thing I wanted to add, one of the reasons why we also cultivate relationships with academic research institutions is knowing that there's a great deal of spin-out activity. Often, some of the most promising innovations that come out of universities, the university will opt to spin it out, right? Because there may be investor interest. And there's been on occasion where the university will say, you can't talk to Professor so-and-so yet, but when that company is formed, we will be happy to introduce you to that team. I'm like, awesome, right? And that has actually led to some fruitful discussions and arrangements. So that is another reason why we like to stay close and build and maintain these relationships. But yes, Galen, I am spending a lot of time more with corporate engagement. And very targeted campaigns from TTOs, which again is appreciated.
Absolutely. I see them wanting to do like science days. They organize, professors or research groups and strengths that they know now align with what we're trying to do, and they want to put together a half day or a few hours of those kind of meet and greets and get those relationships going. And I love that, and so do my scientists. And that wasn't really happening as much, I would say, 5 years ago. And that is the way I think that universities and industry need to work. They need to do it from the scientist level to get them talking, because that's what drives what we do on either side of the fence. The scientists have to be the ones that are excited about these types of partnerships.
And I'd mimic what Tari and Galen have both said in regards to that. One of our biggest areas is the early development. And I think what a major gap is right now, 80% of PhD candidates, fellows, et cetera, will not stay in academia. They'll come out into industry. So to be able to work with NSF and NIH, one of the areas we're really focusing on is the early development piece, because IP is isolated. One of the biggest questions we get asked when we go to a BD deal or to a spin out is, what does the IP package look like? Is it encumbered? So when someone says, hey, I'd like to work with, for anybody that's there in manufacturing, look up Nimble. GSK has been a part of that for about 9 years with the University of Delaware as the lead. That is probably a perfect example of how industry partners, academic, and federal money can be used for the development of synthetic manufacturing. So if we can figure out a way to do that in that type of research, but also support the next wave of scientists that are coming in to industry or academia. Just I say industry because obviously I'm very focused on that. We have a board that we answer to. What does it look like to backfill that expertise? I mean, I can give you an example. Our AI/ML department 4 years ago hired 250 scientists in the artificial intelligence machine learning. I can tell you how many came from other institutions. A very, very small percent. And the only reason was we're a very niche area in the pharmaceutical industry, unless you go to clinical, preclinical, et cetera. So to the question that was asked, are we looking at ways to invest? We absolutely are. And I think that the preclinical developmental science is the perfect way to do it, to be able to support postdocs, to be able to support the basic research, because there's not the IP. I mean, we're not worried about, okay, who's arising as this. We're really looking at scientific development. Sure, it's great. We have a piece of art. We have a patent prosecution. You know, a postdoc gets a paper. That's more important to me, to say a postdoc, a fellow, et cetera, got to come spend some time in industry. We are able to support it. Budgets aren't getting any easier to get. So when I can propose something to say, hey, listen, the federal government is going to help with X, the university is going to put X, and we are going to put piece. I think that's the synergistic type of relationships we need to focus on, because that is going to help not only the scientists, but it's going to make, you know, 𝗟𝗓 or TARI or my institution look like a partner of choice, that we're actually there to help the science come through. Listen, everyone has the moniker of a big bad pharma. We're here to take things. That is not where we are. You know, I worked with 𝗟𝗓, I've worked with TARI. We want to partner. We are told the areas of focus. We are not there. And I'm sure there are people that, you know, are nefarious in that nature. I can tell you right now, within Autumn, within, you know, other organizations, I've never seen anyone really gain traction on trying to, you know, we're not taking advantage. We're trying to work with you. And I think that's something that is really coming around. And I think the federal funding is a piece that over the next couple years, I think we can make some really drastic steps to move forward, to say there's a way we can intermingle all of our money and all of our efforts to try to really look at the development of science to help patients, versus saying, I want to come up with X drug, I want to take your platform and I want to be able to use it. I'm not really worried about the middleman. I just don't think that's the approach that's going to be taken. And I wholeheartedly believe, I can tell you right now, between TARI and 𝗟𝗓, their institutions and themselves are really focused on how can we collaborate and work together if it's the right area for our groups.
Well said, John. And what you said also made me think about changing my answer a little bit earlier about what we're thinking about doing. It is being creative with even little micro programs. Maybe it's $25,000, $50,000 grants or small little research programs that are supporting PhDs, that are supporting postdocs, coming up with new ways of doing postdoc programs that we might fully support. And maybe it's the university's postdoc, but they're working full time on our institutions, or half time going back and forth. These are examples of areas that quite honestly, our scientists just love. And you just didn't see this 10 years ago. But being more creative in this stress, this time of stress, when universities are being forced to, you know, think about how they're going to maintain their programs with less money, it is forcing both sides to come up with more ideas that have never been done before, that the scientists are benefiting from it. And so are these next generation PhDs and postdocs, as you said, because most of them are not going to be able to stay in academia. They're going to come to industry. So they need more opportunities to engage with industry.
This has been super helpful, and I think you've shared some really practical understanding of programs that could be of interest to you, or ways to sort of put the proposal even together and sort of thinking about it anyway in structures. But one question came up that was maybe a little bit more tactical. And John, since you brought up IP, I just wanted to raise that one now. And that is really around for academic collaborations with, or for collaborations with academic researchers, IP is a stumbling block, right? So what works for you to get past lawyers and find mutually acceptable terms if there's IP in those deals?
I try to have a phone call. I mean, everyone in the day and age of texting and sending, you know, quick notes. I think a face-to-face discussion on where we need to be. I'm a huge proponent of not to get putting together term sheets, but I think it's a very valid, direct conversation to have very early on. This is where we want to get to. If you can get that, you can get over that hump. If we have, you know, people that are willing to work together, we want to work, the scientists are aligned, we need to find a way. I think having a very real discussion, I mean, obviously we're not taking advantage of federal funds. We would never put, you know, your tax exempt status at bay. However, my general position on IP is, you know, do a project without it, which, you know, not everyone's excited to do very often, but that makes it easy. But when we get into a conversation where, you know, IP counsel on both sides are sort of at an impasse, my comment generally to the IP council on the other side, or whoever's being very, staunch. And I understand that we all have bosses, but is to say, would you do that for us? I mean, I know where GSK would commercialize. I'm not going to commercialize your platform. I'm not going to commercialize a tech in regards. We're there to make pharmaceuticals and get them to patients. So I try to isolate conversations to be very clear to say, as long as I can use your IP in a way that helps me show to my board, and this is to the conversation we had very early on, I have to prove to a review board and a review panel for investments over, 10 million pounds. So if I have to go to them and say, hey, listen, University X has this really exciting piece of tech, and we've replicated their work within GSK, and now we want to take an exclusive license to that and be able to use that in perpetuity and pay them for that, but I need to be able to prove that to GSK. So that is the position I take on IP, is that if I am not going to take your platform, I'm not going to reach into your coffers and try to expose your entire university and say that magically that's GSK. And what I do is I do ask for a reciprocal response. Is GSK, let's just say we're working with a compound X that's in the clinic. You want to show that your pancreatic adenocarcinoma platform in a mouse is the best one out there. That's great. But one of the things we really trip over is we go to do that work with you, and within GSK, we're doing other work, or the university might be doing other work. And one of the questions we get asked, if we come up with a new indication, University X wants X percentage of royalties off that. Now, that could happen, that may happen. Great. But I mean, to start a conversation at IP and to the point of when we're just trying to do the research that we've set out to do to say, does your platform work? I think it's premature. And I think it's led, I can know one institution very specifically that I have a wonderful relationship with their tech transfer. And the rationale behind it is we have killed so many deals over IP that we've gotten to the position that we're actually communicating very early on. We need to get to here. Can we get there? I don't like to do that. I don't want to kill a scientist's dream to work with GSK on this side or the other side. So I think IP is the elephant in the room. It always will be. But I think backing off and understanding what is the real instance where IP would be at such a critical mass that we are not entering into a competition. This is not a BD deal in most forms. It could develop into that with some of the startups and spin-ups. I agree. But at the same time, let's be realistic in where we are with the IP. I mean, if art develops, great. We'll talk about it. We'll go into terms. If it's that critical mass for GSK, we will invest in it. You will see money come your way. But if it's a nice to have, and I'm sorry, I've had conversations with universities at autumn meetings, and I've talked to their BD, and I've followed up with them and had meetings like, you think everything you do, and this is true for both sides, I'm not saying one, is worth X amount of dollars. Well, the reality is it may or may not be, because what it takes is an institution to say, I'm really interested to do this, you're interested to do that. What are we going to do in the IP space? And it's unfortunate that we've killed deals over IP, but I agree. I think stepping back and saying, what are the chances? Can we negotiate in good faith further down the line to get there, just so we can start this work? And that's the approach I use. And I'm sorry that took way too long to get there. I apologize.
But I think, John, you make an excellent point. Is that every time, and I was taught this, and this is also how I've mentored, those that have come after me, is that it's always exciting. It's like, oh, we're going to do an agreement, right? And all of us, we've done contracting in either our current lives or past lives. It's like, oh, I get to do this. But you must step back and ask, why are we doing this? Because one, that decides what type of agreement we're going to do. And then what are the really important things? What are the important must-have pieces? And what are the deal breakers? Now, to the point of this question, yes, we seem to argue about IP a lot. But and what I love what John brought up, it's like you must look realistically about what is the IP that is likely to be generated, if at all. Because if you're fighting over something that will never exist, you're fighting just for the sake of fighting, and that's a waste of everybody's time. I actually did a research collaboration with Novo Nordisk in one of my academic lives. And now I'm on the other side. And even though I no longer negotiate our contract, but I work very closely with our contracting group. And to the point of this question, our contract group are all lawyers. right? Because they understand all the different global laws in the different regions, but they also have learned how to work with academic institutions across the globe. And I've seen our templates, and they are quite reasonable in that regard. And so I always get a little startled when, all of a sudden I'll hear from my contractors just like, we're getting some pushback on this. I was like, are you kidding? So it's understand that we too have a sensitivity to what your policies, etc. But you have to be very honest with yourself about why you're fighting for something, right? And we can have that conversation. And when I was doing my deal with Novo, my Novo counterpart is like, Tari, can you just stop and listen? Right? Why is this so important? And if you can answer that question, maybe we can solve this, right? So that was a lesson I learned, and I still take to this day. So don't avoid the lawyers, but make sure your lawyers are also thinking on the same rationale and logic as you are. So
Yeah.
And I'll just add, because both John and Tari brought up such good points, it is easier when you have sat on both sides of the table, because then you have that perspective of IP, of what that means to both sides. I think back to when I was working only at universities and hospitals and how I used to talk to companies. And now I'm like Tari, sitting on this side of the table. I also did a deal with Boehringer Ingelheim. That's actually why I'm here now. 6 months or so later, they just called me and said, can you please come here? Because we need somebody that understands universities better. So companies want to understand universities. They don't want to take advantage of them, is what was said earlier. They want to come to these compromises. And I think anyone that's been doing this for a long time, and especially if you've sat on both sides of the table, you realize, as John said, that phone call is so important, where you can scope out what the relationship should look like in regards to IP. And then you just have the lawyers put that in text, right? But if you agree to what that relationship is and who's going to own what, and maybe, if it needs to have subcategories and how deep that's going to be, if you can agree to that, then you tell the lawyers how that relationship is going to be. If you can't agree to that in a phone call early on, then you just save everybody the headache and the time and maybe bad will by getting to the point where you're 75% through a contract and you've encumbered all this lawyer time on both sides. Has now become a very expensive agreement, and everyone's frustrated that you can't agree on either publication, confidentiality, use of data and results, or IP. So have those conversations before you start drafting and putting text down, because I think you'll save yourself a lot of time. I just did that yesterday with an institution that we've done a lot of work with. We have a lot of goodwill with them. And I know we wanted to do something that was not with a tool molecule, not with something that's been published in patent, kind of a stealth molecule. And we now have the trust to say to them, we'd like to do this project, but we know up front, this is going to take you way outside of your policies, your IP policies, and how you normally do contracts. It is an expensive project. And the PI, I also did my homework and had my scientists talk with the PI support this IP strategy. Your PI is on board, but the business development office, is this something that you can get on board with? If not, it's okay. No big deal. We'll do something different, but we just want to suggest it to you. But me even saying to them, I understand this is outside of your comfort zone and your IP policies, I think goes a long way in that relationship. As Tari said earlier, it's all about the relationship, but trying to not take advantage of doing a bunch of work and then having hard discussions. You learn that as you've been doing this for a long time, that you don't want to do that.
So insightful. Everything you've shared is so insightful. And I think you're right. We can't underestimate the ability to just kind of talk on the phone, and who doesn't want another Zoom in your day? So it is, but it is nice to see the faces and know who you're talking to. And I do think that makes a big difference. We are getting quite a few questions in here. And though I have some that I would like to ask, I'm going to move to the next question that one of our LinkedIn users asked, which is, how do you split your investments between academics, pre-seed startups, Series A, B startups, more mature companies? Like, what are the driving factors you're looking for?
Can I start with that?
You can.
There is no formula. I will tell you that, right? And certainly for my company, right? We we do look across all of it, right? As I said before, because we have a pipeline to feed and we need to feed it at all stages. Yes. And, you can't look at, either, a biotech newsletter or marketing report, and it will tell you where like all of these gaps are, many of the pharmaceutical companies, we at some point in the not so far future, we are going to see some serious gaps in terms of products, right? So we call those the patent cliffs, for those that are newer to this. That is actually very good information, because if you can see where that cliff is, then that means that shows you what we're trying to fill. That is our most immediate, highly prioritized need. So then you can do the math backwards in time, which is, okay, so if you need a product in, let's just say 2042, how far back can we go to really fill that, right? We will try to fill it everywhere, because the attrition rate is not insignificant, right? I can't be like, I'm just going to do this one deal and that's going to be what's going to fill the gap. I mean, anything can happen. You can find issues at all stages of discovery and development. So we have to be strategic. We have to be also open-minded. And again, science, data, and here's a word we're not talking about a lot, but we should really scream it loud from the high rooftops is this going to translate? Right? We have cured mice of just about everything. A few non-human primates along the way, but will it hold through clinic? And again, the three of us, we work for companies where it's all about the patients, right? And whatever diseases they unfortunately are suffering from. And that is always my first question is, what evidence do you have that this mechanism will translate? And I'll ask it from an academic to a pharmaceutical company like 𝗟𝗲 and John's. So we do have different channels for different stages. For instance, at Novo Nordisk, we have a bona fide small corporate venture group that will go very early stage to kind of see if we can validate something, but they focus more on biotechs. But we have other groups that will focus more on academic research. Because I've been in the space, I just tend to look at everything. I told the story about the startup that was currently being formed from the academic. So we hit that one right shortly after it was incorporated. And there's many of the seed and Series A, et cetera. It all comes down to what do you have? And I always do this on every panel I speak at. There's 4 criteria that I will ask everyone other than the translatability. Is it safe? Does it work? Is it scalable? And is it differentiated? And if you can tick all those boxes, regardless of whoever you are, an academic lab working on a particular program to, a well-funded, Series BC company, then we have a lot to talk about. So, and that's part of the way that I was trained for scouting. Do you guys have formulas of how you're supposed to split up? Because like I said, I have none.
I think it's the same, Tari, on our side too. What I will say to academics that are online is that, 25 years ago when we were doing this business, pharma companies wanted things more later stage, but now it's like early stage is better. We kind of want to be talking to scientists early. So we can help craft the patent strategies so things aren't kind of, not done correctly early on, or done in a certain way that's not going to help us, or just be involved in collaborating with the science to help drive the project. So I see things where pharma wants to get in and really partner with your scientists early on. So don't be afraid of that either, of pitching ideas where you think you have something or some sort of expertise, or you even just have tools like ex vivo models or animal models or things that are really special, and that it would help in our space. It's not that you have to have a new drug or entity that we're going to be looking at. You could have competencies or access to tissue in certain patient populations that's going to really help drive why we want to work with you.
And I think there's going to be a shift. I'll just say something quick, Nicole, because I know you need to move on. The only thing I think is there's going to be a shift, and this is my personal opinion, just because the nature of the company I work for. And I just want to say that I think there will be a shift because of budgets. There's not more money floating around. We do not have a magic tree that we pull it off of. So I look at when we do a phase 2, phase 3 project where we purchase something late stage, that is an immediate need. We're filling a gap. We have a patent cliff, as Tari went into. But at the same time, I have this discussion with our search and eval guys all the time sit within our BD group. And there is some consternation between us both. So my position is very skewed towards the academic space. To Gayleen's point is, why would I not want to get in the door when you come up with the idea to partner with you, to be able to meld the focus, meld the project, not only to what our expertise is, but what does the science, what does the patient need, to be able to collaborate with you as it moves on, because we all know developing a drug is expensive. I can develop a drug. Our company can develop a drug. You focus on the science, and I'll help you, give you moving targets to say, okay, the regulators are going to look like this. Standard of care is this. And then we can actually really develop something. Now, if we walk away, great. But you've had a partner that knows how to develop a drug, make a nice package for you, and be able to say, we're not interested, but someone smaller might want to get, you might want to get VC money to be able to help this. Maybe you fill that gap and you get across, and you're able to basically package this up and sell it off to somebody to help you out. But I think there is going to be a shift that I would be surprised if we don't see more involvement in pharmaceutical in the startup or phase 1 development style work coming off the bench from an academic and moving into development. We had a program like that years ago. We're starting to see interest in it. I'm starting to see interest in it come back in within GSK. It was called our DPAC, Discovery Partnership and Academic Collaborations. I'm sure there's a number of people on this call that have worked with us before, and we did exactly that. They were very successful. Again, we pivot. It went away, but now we're starting to see it come back a little bit. So I would be surprised if we don't see that come back again and partner earlier on to help move things through development.
This is all very useful information, and for us and the tech transfer office at WashU, we appreciate those conversations and your willingness to participate early, even if it helps inform how we use money to drive projects forward and de-risk them. So it's great to hear that. We'll move to our last question, but before we do that, for anyone who joined us late, the PowerPoint deck we are using has slides summarizing the types of collaborations each of these companies are looking for. So if you want the PowerPoint deck for future use, please check the comments on the LinkedIn and download it from there. So we'll move to our last question. So for those in the audience interested in partnering or collaborating with your companies, what's the best way to propose a partnership or funding or licensing opportunity with you or your company? We just have about 4 minutes left, so maybe we'll just do round robin real quick here. Okay, John, do you want to start?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn, make a conversation. If you have a GSK scientist you've talked to at a presentation, seen a poster, seen a paper, you can give me their name. Reach out to them. We are scientifically aligned. The scientists come to me. So if you have something specific, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to respond. But if there's something scientifically, of value that you've had a conversation, get that GSK scientist to reach out to me. We can start that conversation very quickly.
Thanks, John. Tari, you want to go next?
Yeah. One of my favorite approaches is, as to what we've said before, if you've done your homework and you come to me with 2 things, if you have available intellectual property and preferably with very recent priority dates in my space, you can share that. But I am actually more interested in your list of researchers, labs, capabilities that are aligned with our strategy. So if you have a diabetes center, right? Highlight that to me and say, hey, Tari, we've got a diabetes center. Here's our faculty in it. This is what they work on. We're going to have a fantastic conversation. Very similar with the other therapeutic areas that I shared, such as obesity and cardiovascular. The sooner that we can come to alignment on interests, the sooner that we can actually talk about a real partnership.
Thanks. Gayleen?
So similar to what they said, you can come to me on LinkedIn. It's also easy to find the scouts and our business development and licensing team online, the BerringerIngelheim.com, the partnering section that I said. You'll see a list of each scout, their pictures, their cell phone numbers, their email addresses, and they're organized by indications, not by geography. So I don't have to be the gatekeeper. You can go directly to them for any licensing interests, or if you just have some really good research capabilities, they'll funnel that back to me. And likewise, when licensing thing comes to me, we work very closely together. I send some stuff to them all the time as well. But do your homework. Make sure that while you're sending stuff to us, that it's it's a target. It's aligned with what we're looking for. Because otherwise you might not get answers. If we see something that we know you're just throwing it out there everywhere, people might not respond to you. So do your homework.
Wonderful. And this slide that came up right now, the potential collaboration idea, this slide's in the PowerPoint deck and it summarizes some of the best practices. And you can, again, pull that out of the LinkedIn comments. So we have 1 minute left here. I'm going to ask this question. Is AI going to make decisions for you in sort of collaborations and partnerships in the future?
Oh.
For me, no. I mean, I have a team that is dedicated towards identification and initial evaluation, and we're going to continue to leverage what's in our brains. We will use AI to help make things a little more efficient process-wise, but instincts always play a big role.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, same. It'll help with some of the searching that's out there, and it'll help with organizing the information that's coming in, large data sets of information that you're trying to search for. But this is a relationship business. At the end of the day, it's all about relationships.
I think it'll key off the administrative aspects of it, make our lives easier so we actually have a conversation with somebody about working together. And that's my personal opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, as we've heard today, private sector partnerships are critical to sustaining and accelerating U.S. research. And we've received a lot of other tips today. So working together, we can drive innovation, train the next generation of scientists, and deliver life-changing therapies. Thank you, Gaylene, Tari, and John, for sharing such useful and insightful information. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. If you'd like to learn more, please feel free to connect with our panelists on LinkedIn. We hope you have a great day and keep fueling innovation.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Apologies for the connection issue.